A luxurious party was in full swing. Rich guests in expensive clothes moved around, enjoying drinks and gourmet food. Everything looked perfect. Sophia, the elegant and proud wife of a wealthy businessman, stood at the center. She smiled as she welcomed her guests, her diamond necklace sparkling under the chandelier. She loved attention. She loved power. But then her eyes landed on an old black woman standing near the kitchen door. The woman's clothes were simple, her hands rough with age. She looked out of place. Sophia's smile faded. Her voice turned sharp. "Who let this woman in?" she asked loudly. The guests turned to look. The old woman lowered her head. A servant hesitated, then whispered, "Madam, she is Martha, the boss's childhood nanny." Sophia's expression changed. Her eyes filled with disgust. She stepped forward and crossed her arms. "A nanny!" she scoffed. "What is she doing in my house?" The room fell silent. All eyes were on them. The air grew heavy with tension. Sophia's lips curled in disgust. She looked Martha up and down, then let out a cold laugh. "People like you don't belong here," she said. "This is a party for important guests, not for poor old maids." Martha swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. She took a small step forward and said softly, "I only came to see Daniel. I raised him like my own son." Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "Son?" she repeated mockingly. "Don't fool yourself. You were just a servant." The guests whispered among themselves. Some looked uncomfortable. Others smirked, enjoying the drama. Sophia turned to the servants. "Throw her out," she ordered. "Now!" A servant hesitated. "Madam, I said now," Sophia snapped. Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she did not argue. She lowered her head and slowly turned to leave. Sophia smirked. To her, Martha was nothing, just a shadow from the past. She had no idea what was coming next. The room was still buzzing with whispers when the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. He had arrived late from a business meeting, but something felt off. The tense silence, the uncomfortable looks. He noticed Sophia standing tall, a smug expression on her face. Then his eyes fell on the frail figure walking toward the door. Martha, his childhood nanny, his second mother. His heart sank. He rushed forward, his voice urgent. "Martha? What are you doing here?" Martha stopped but didn't turn around. Her voice was weak. "I just came to see if you were doing well." Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked around. What happened? A nervous servant stepped forward and whispered the truth. Daniel's face darkened. His hands clenched into fists. He turned to Sophia, his voice cold. "Tell me, this isn't true." Sophia rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Daniel. She's just a nanny. I told her to leave." Daniel's breathing grew heavy. His voice dropped. "Just a nanny." He shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with anger and pain. Without another word, he stormed out of the house. He had to find Martha. He had to fix this. Daniel found Martha sitting alone on a park bench. The cold wind blew against her fragile frame. She clutched her old shawl, shivering. Her eyes stared at the ground, filled with quiet pain. Without hesitation, Daniel took off his coat and gently placed it over her shoulders. She looked up, surprised. Tears welled in her eyes. "You didn't have to come, my boy," she whispered. Daniel knelt before her, his voice shook. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you leave like that?" Martha gave a sad smile. "I didn't want to cause trouble." Daniel took a deep breath. His hands clenched. His voice was filled with emotion. "You were never trouble, Martha. You were my family." He looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke the truth. The truth Sophia never knew. When my parents ignored me, you held my hand. His voice cracked. When I was sick, you worked night and day to buy my medicine. He swallowed hard. When I had no money for school, you gave me everything you had. Martha blinked back tears. She gently touched his face. I only did what a mother would do. Daniel grabbed her hands tightly. Then let me do what a son should do. Martha shook her head. I don't need anything, child. But Daniel's decision was already made, and soon Sophia would regret everything she had done. The next morning, Sophia woke up feeling victorious. She had put that old woman in her place. She believed she had done the right thing. But her confidence shattered when she saw Daniel packing his bags. Her eyes widened. Where are you going? She demanded. Daniel didn't look at her. His voice was cold. I can't stay with someone who disrespects the person who raised me. Sophia scoffed. You're leaving me over a servant? Daniel turned to face her, his eyes filled with disappointment. She was never a servant to me. She was my mother when my own mother didn't care. Sophia felt her stomach drop. You're serious? She whispered. Daniel nodded. Serious enough to end this marriage. He grabbed his suitcase and walked past her without another word. Sophia panicked. She ran after him. Wait, you can't just leave. Daniel stopped at the door. He turned around and dropped the final blow. By the way, I transferred everything in your name back to my account. His expression was unreadable. You married me for money, Sophia. Now let's see how you live without it. Sophia gasped. Her world crashed around her. Meanwhile, Daniel drove to Martha's small house. He knocked on the door and smiled when she opened it. Come home with me, he said softly. Tears ran down Martha's face, but this time they were tears of joy. Martha hesitated at the doorstep. Her hands trembled slightly. Are you sure, my boy? She asked, her voice filled with emotion. Daniel smiled warmly. Home is not a place, Martha. It's the people we love, and I want you with me. Tears rolled down Martha's cheeks. She had spent years alone, forgotten. But now she finally felt wanted, loved, and respected. That evening, Daniel took her back to the mansion. But this time she was not a visitor. She was family. The staff greeted her with respect. Some even apologized for what had happened. Days passed, and Sophia's life fell apart. With no money and no one to support her, she experienced the same humiliation she once gave to others. People who once admired her turned away. She finally understood what kindness and respect truly meant. One day, she gathered the courage to visit the mansion. She saw Daniel and Martha sitting in the garden, laughing like mother and son. Guilt weighed heavy on her heart. She stepped forward, her voice shaky. I'm sorry, she whispered. Martha looked at her for a long moment. Then she simply smiled and said, I hope you have learned. Sophia lowered her head. She had lost everything, except the lesson that respect and love matter more than money. As Martha and Daniel sat together, watching the sunset, it was clear. Kindness always wins in the end. Life has a way of teaching lessons in unexpected ways. Respect and kindness should never be based on wealth or status. Sophia thought she was powerful because of money. But in the end, she lost everything. Pride and cruelty led to her downfall. On the other hand, Martha, the woman once humiliated, gained love and respect because of her kindness. She never asked for anything, yet life rewarded her with a son's love and a place to call home. Daniel's decision proved that true family is not about blood, but about love and loyalty. He never forgot the woman who raised him. He stood up for what was right, even when it meant walking away from his own wife. This story teaches us that karma is real. What we give to the world comes back to us. If we choose kindness, we will receive kindness. But if we choose cruelty, life will eventually teach us a painful lesson. Always treat people with respect and dignity, because in the end, wealth fades, but character remains. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of kindness, respect, and life lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking stories that inspire and teach important lessons.